Right, moving on, President Xi Jinping of China will be leaving for a tour of Africa and West Asia in what can be seen as Beijing's attempt to further cement its role as the region's closest economic and diplomatic ally. Now, Xi will travel to the UAE, Senegal, Rwanda, South Africa and Mauritius, where China's economic clout and strategic ambitions are growing. Currently, Chinese money is funding a 1,400-kilometer-long railway line in Nigeria, a highway in Algeria, and new cities in Egypt and South Africa. This week's trip is likely an attempt to strengthen China's hold over the African continent, with Xi Jinping possibly offering further investments. But with these deals comes immense debt for the African nations. Already, China accounts for more than a sixth of Africa's loans. Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India is also travelling to East Africa at the same time as President Xi. It could be because both India and China are aware of the strategic significance of East Africa as an emerging market. The BRICS summit in South Africa later this month is likely to see a revving up of India's rivalry with China for influence in resource-rich Africa. Official sources said that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to visit Rwanda and neighbouring Uganda on his way to South Africa for the BRICS summit starting the 25th of July. Modi will land in the Rwandan capital of Kigali a day or two after President Xi. Modi is expected to sign several agreements with both countries. And why not? India is looking to make headway in both the countries, where China has emerged as an important partner in post-conflict reconstruction work. All right, joining me now is Isabel Nakivia, correspondent from Kampala in Uganda. Thank you for joining us on WION Dispatch. Now, can you contrast the two visits of President Xi and Prime Minister Modi, the agreement that will likely sign on the occasion of their visits to the East African region?
Thank you. Uganda expects Prime Minister Modi on 24th of this month. He's expected to meet with President Museveni at the State House in Entebbe, and thereafter he will also meet a group of Indians. Over 30,000 Indians live in Uganda, and he's supposed to meet them. I think those are the business communities in Uganda. And then he'll also address Parliament, the Parliament of Uganda thereafter. But dating back to relations between Uganda and India, we understand that their relations began way back in 1965 when trade between India and the East African nations was rife along the Indian Ocean. And that is when the trade began. And that brings a cultural tie between these two nations. India has played a big part in manufacturing, in the banking industry, in pharmaceutical industries in Uganda. We expect that when the Prime Minister Modi arrives here, those are some of the ties that he's going to discuss with President Museveni, and we expect a number of trade agreements to be signed between these two leaders. And of course, there is China on the other end, and we think that China has placed a big footprint in Uganda and East Africa as such, placing over $4 billion in aid to Uganda. And so India has got a big part to play in trying to outwin China's investment. But, you know, India plays a bigger role in cultural ties because it was here long before China, and over 200 Chinese companies are already here. So it's a big part that Prime Minister Modi will play and trying to bridge this gap and trying to create further bigger investments with Uganda when he comes. Indeed, and very quickly, Isabel, now some people accuse China of practicing checkbook diplomacy or debt trap diplomacy. Now, how does Uganda look at ties with both India and China? Now, some people say that while China gives African people fish, India teaches them how to fish, and that's the qualitative difference between India and China when it comes to Africa. What I think is that India was here long before China, and it has that advantage over China, and most of the big companies in Uganda are in Indian companies, though there are several other smaller companies that are here from India. But China just came recently, and it has amassed a lot of amassed a lot of wealth here, invested a lot of big infrastructure developments here. It has invested in infrastructures like hydropower dams. It's building the airport in Uganda. It's also building roads and highways. So, and most of these companies are multi-billion, multi-million companies that India does not have here. So India has invested over $4 billion in Uganda. Though India has about 60% of the taxes that India puts directly in Uganda, and becoming one of the biggest taxpayers in Uganda, I think that China has a big advantage over India.
All right, on that note, Isabel, thank you so much for joining us on WION Dispatch.